All right. I think we're going to get started. Welcome. Happy, I don't even know what day of the week it is. I think it's Thursday. Oh, yes, it's Thursday. My name is Steve Chiatakis. I'm the host of Greater LA on KCRW. Thank you for joining us on our Zoom chat, our webinar today. So pleased that you can join us for our first virtual Ask an Expert, which is titled Navigating Unemployment and Rent Issues Under COVID-19. We're waiting for everyone to jump on board right now, but go ahead and pull up the Q&A box, which is on the bottom of your screen, so down there somewhere, and you can start typing your questions. Tomorrow, by the way, we're going to be sending out a recap of this conversation with useful websites and links to all of you. So whatever information you're getting today, we're going to record this. We're going to have that information in perpetuity, so you'll be able to check it out later, if you will, as well. So that retention, aspect of your mind, you're not going to have to really think about today. You'll have it to look at later as well. We've got a couple of experts on today's program to help answer your rent and unemployment questions. And by the way, there are a lot of them in what we're dealing with right now as far as the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus. Our experts are coming from the law firm Beit Zedek. This is a pro bono legal firm founded in 1974 by a small group of volunteer Jewish attorneys who felt that they needed to address in LA and the surrounding areas human rights issues. Since that time, the agency has grown to a staff of more than 80 people, supported by more than 1,000 volunteers, believe it or not. That's been providing, this is much like public radio actually, that's been providing free legal assistance to thousands of under or unrepresented residents of LA County. So I want to welcome to the program Matthew DeCarlis, who's staff attorney with Beit Zedek and is with the Employment Rights Project, and Cynthia Chagoya, who's head of Beit Zedek's Preventing and Ending Homelessness Project, and she leads the charge on the Eviction Defense Network as well. I want to thank you both, Cynthia and Matthew. Welcome.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Cynthia, I'm going to start with you just to get the ball rolling, maybe break the ice a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about what Beit Zedek does.
Sure. So Beit Zedek is a free legal service provider in Los Angeles County to moderate income and low income individuals and families. We have a dozen or so projects that specialize in particular areas. I am the head of our Preventing and Ending Homelessness Project, and our main priority is keeping families housed and preventing families from experiencing homelessness or housing instability. My colleague, of course, Matt, he works in our Employment Rights Project. They tackle numerous issues regarding employment, including wage and hour issues, employment discrimination, and of course, unemployment matters.
How much, Cynthia, and I'll turn to you too, Matthew, has the volume of your work gone up in just the past few months because of what's happening with the coronavirus?
Our group with the Employment Rights Project always has a stream of low-income workers who need our assistance. As Cynthia mentioned, we focus historically on wage theft cases in particular for the most vulnerable workers in LA County, but we've used in the last few months since coronavirus hit and the stay-at-home orders have been in effect because so many people have been affected in their employment and their personal lives.
I want to get started with the questions because we have a lot of them to start with, but to those of us who are joining in the conversation, if you're just coming on right now, welcome to Ask an Expert, Navigating Unemployment and Rent Issues Under COVID-19. I want to take a quick poll though, if we can, which is something that we can do on this Zoom webinar right now. You should see it pop up on your screen. And we're going to ask you why you came here in the first place. What is the primary reason for your being here? It's a multiple choice question. Is it because of rent issues? Is it because of unemployment issues, or neither issue? You just want to talk about what you're binge watching these days. I don't know, but there's obviously a lot to talk about that our experts are here to do. And we're seeing this quick poll right now. Boy, the one thing about this, it's obviously this is very scientific because it's just the people who are here. And if you're taking this poll, we're seeing that most people are here for unemployment issues. But anyway, so we'll allow that to sort of stay up for a while. But I want to start with the questions if we can. And let's get to it now. I guess I'll start with you, Matthew. What if I'm asked, this is from Melanie, what if I'm asked to go back to work, but I have children at home? What happens in a situation like that?
Yeah, this is a very common scenario these days, Melanie. You're far from the only one, unfortunately. And there may be a couple of different opportunities for you here, depending on the facts of your circumstances. And of course, Cynthia, I'm sure we'll share this caveat that we're not able to provide specific personal legal advice here. We're just providing general information based on the little bit of information we're getting from the questions. So that's our lawyerly caveat to everyone. You should feel free to speak with someone in our office or another lawyer for your personal circumstances. But if you can't go to work right now because you are the sole provider of child care, because your child's school or their daycare has closed down due to COVID, you may be entitled to apply for unemployment insurance benefits. And even if you don't qualify for that, you may be able to get paid family leave or some other program. It really is going to vary on the facts in your case, but there are different options available these days.
Okay, let's get to another question for Cynthia. This is about rent. The rent moratorium will end on May 31st. It's not a rent moratorium, it's an eviction moratorium, right? On May 31st. Do you think California will extend it like New York did today until August? And a follow-up is, what are my options if they do not? And my landlord is threatening eviction if I can't pay on June 1st. I offered to pay a reduced rent instead of no rent, and they would not accept that.
Okay, so there's two parts to this question, and I'm going to tackle the first part by sharing my screen. So let me go ahead and do that.
Bear with us for a second because we're trying to, yeah. So let's do it, Cynthia. Let's see if we can do it. Okay, so, there we go.
So complicated question, but I'll try to address it in a few parts. So for the first part, I will say that, visit our website. We have numerous resources on our website. In particular, our team put together a 34-page guide that tries to, give an overall summary of what kind of protections are available to tenants now in Los Angeles County. So in terms of the first question, the first level of consideration that you're going to have is you're going to want to look at whatever emergency ordinance or emergency protections your city has passed in where you live. So here we have a cheat sheet. And so, of course, in the County of Los Angeles, we have the Board of Supervisors, which governs the County of Los Angeles. And then within the county, we have 88 different cities. And this is where protections can get really complicated because over the last few weeks, various cities have taken action and passed local protections for their residents. So if you live in LA City, your protections may be different than if you live in West Hollywood. And those protections will be different if you live in Culver City. And the reason why I share this cheat sheet is if you look to the column on the left, it summarizes or it identifies the kind of protections that are available to tenants now. And you see rent deferral. And what rent deferral means is if you are unable to pay your rent due to COVID-19, you get more time to pay your rent. There's also a repayment period, and that repayment period differs from the different cities. Most cities now have a 1-year repayment plan. So if you're unable to pay your rent during the emergency COVID period, you get 1 year to pay your rent. There's also notice deadlines. If you're unable to pay your rent due to COVID-19, based on where you live, you have to follow certain rules and give your landlord notice within a particular time frame. So for example, if you live in a place that's governed by the County of Los Angeles, you have 7 days to notify your landlord of your inability to pay your rent. If you live in the city of Los Angeles, you don't have that requirement. If you live in Culver City, you have 30 days to give your landlord notice. So there's numerous different steps to consider. But with the question, if you're unable to pay your rent during the emergency COVID period, you need to know what repayment time you have, if any. And like I said, in many jurisdictions, that's now up to a year. So you get a year to pay back that rent. But
that leads
it's
to a lot
also
of different
true
questions too, right, Cynthia? Like as far as like if you have a year to pay back rent, and I know this is a lot of lamenting that's been going on that we've been reporting on at the radio station as well, which is the fact that if you're without a job and your back rent is building up, it's going to be really difficult to pay your back rent as you go forward, correct?
Right. As of now, there is no jurisdiction that has come out and provided rent forgiveness. And that would be, rent forgiveness that informs tenants that they're not obligated to pay their rent during the COVID period time. Most cities as of now have only said you get more time to pay that rent, but the rent is still due. The city of Los Angeles just passed a substantial renters protection fund last week. It was millions of dollars. It's unclear how those funds are going to be dispersed. Different cities countywide are passing, putting funds aside to help tenants pay their rent. But that's still a missing piece. As of now, the obligation to pay rent continues.
Yeah, it's obviously going to be a big problem. We've talked to other lawyers and other housing advocates who say this is going to be, the evictions are going to be enormous going forward if there's not some sort of forgiveness or maybe a longer period of time to allow people to pay the back rent or what have you. But there are going to be problems going forward for sure. Okay, thank you for that, Cynthia. Go ahead, please.
I was going to say that's true, but tenants should know. Tenants should absolutely know that you have due process protection rights. So if you are unable to pay your rent for any reason, and not during just the COVID period, if you're unable to pay your rent, there's a process that the landlord must file. So for example, first your landlord must give you a notice, 3 days to pay rent or quit. So you get 3 days to pay your rent or move out. If you're unable to cure within that time, your landlord is not allowed under California law to lock you out. They must go through the court process. And what we are anticipating is numerous cases, hundreds of thousands of cases in the state of California are going to go through that court process, but there are in fact due process rights. There will be an opportunity to negotiate with your landlord, to negotiate with the other side. So these are scary times for tenants, but just know that you have rights and protections. And there's some other protections I can get into later that have been put in place by the courts that should let you know that you're safe and you should feel secure in your housing.
Okay, that's good to know. And again, I'll reiterate that these slides that you're showing us, right, Cynthia, we're going to have available for anybody to look at tomorrow, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, good. Thank you for the answer to that question. We have another anonymous attendee who wants to ask this one. This is, can you get temporary forgiveness for credit card companies and car loans? Temporary forgiveness being, I guess, meaning I can't pay my car notes, my credit card bill, so can I pay it later or can I forego this month? Who wants to tackle that one?
I mean, I'll just give a generic answer because it's not squarely within the area of my expertise, but I would say the first attempt would be to negotiate with the creditors and try to get more time to pay back those monies owed. There are several organizations in the County of Los Angeles that focus on consumer debt One that comes to mind is Public Counsel. They do have a consumer debt clinic. So you should start to seek out those resources, and just know that, you know, one immediate first step might be to try to negotiate with the creditors.
Okay. You just talked about, Cynthia, rent. What do you think about rent striking? Many of us do not expect our industry to start up until the end of 2020 or 2021. Should we save our money for basic living expenses and just end rent strike, not pay the rent?
That's a tough question that many tenants are facing right now. You know, there are numerous tenant organizers and tenant rights organizations that are working collaboratively to execute a rent strike. You know, with respect to the protections available to tenants under the strict orders and ordinances in LA County, the threshold question is, can you pay the rent, yes or no? So it's complicated. You know, there's an argument that if you have the money available to pay the rent and you just choose not to, it's questionable whether all of those protections under those emergency rules are going to apply, based on the particular jurisdiction where you live. I cannot stress this enough. If you are considering a rent strike, I would urge you to get connected to legal services and get connected to a tenants union. There's the Los Angeles Tenants Union that is doing a lot of work in this area, and get connected so that you could have the support of communities and advocates who are taking that work on.
Strength in numbers is what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes.
Matthew, here's one for you. This is from Francis. I had a small business shop in Glendale. I had to close it in December due to continual rent increases. Now I'm unemployed. Am I eligible for unemployment? I was a sole proprietor. I didn't make a salary. The last year there was a tiny profit, but I put it back into the business. And she says, thank you.
So Francis, you may qualify for a new program that came from Congress at the end of March. It's called Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, PUA. Generally speaking, historically, people who are sole proprietors or self-employed are not eligible for traditional unemployment benefits. However, because of the severity of the situation now with the COVID pandemic, this new program, PUA, exists for people who wouldn't otherwise qualify for unemployment. Now, given that you closed the business in December, you may be denied by EDD, the state agency, the Employment Development Department that administers both unemployment benefits and PUA. Reason being is that PUA exists to provide income for people who lost their income as a result of COVID.
Okay.
So if there's some connection between your having to close the business and COVID, then you may qualify.
Here's another one for you, Matthew. This is from Ken. I'm a writer and have an S Corp as well. Do residuals paid to an S Corp needed to be reported to EDD? I know residuals directly to me individually do need to be reported, but income to the S Corp gets flipped into salary to myself, which is both taxed and reported as income. So wanted to confirm that I don't need to report residuals to the S Corp.
So most of our traditional clients at Betsedic don't have S Corps, since we're traditionally serving lower income people and people who don't traditionally have access to that. But that being said, what we generally say is that as you're certifying with EDD every 2 weeks and required to report income very broadly defined, if you look at EDD's website on the FAQs about certifying, they have a bullet list of about 15 different types of payments that they consider to be income. We always encourage people, err on the side of caution, declare it. EDD will analyze it and determine if in fact it's income for purposes of them reducing your benefits for that particular week. Because the consequences of not declaring it when you were required to can be severe, not just in terms of potentially getting served with an overpayment where you have to pay back benefits, but also potentially penalties and disqualification for a certain period of time for your future benefits. So better safe than sorry.
Penalties are never fun. This one is for you, Cynthia. Our landlord, this is from Leslie. And by the way, thank you, Ken, for your question. Leslie asks, our landlord decided to terminate our month-to-month lease for a residential agreement unrelated to COVID or rent payment. The safer at home mandate put things on hold, but now we don't know how much time it will have before we're legally required to vacate. And I just lost that question. Let me try it again. Hang on. Here it is. What legal rights do we have if they put their prior eviction on hold once the statewide order is lifted? Will it go back to normal, to the normal 60-day notice normally required in California, or can they ask us to leave sooner?
So it sounds like this individual has received a 60-day notice, but that the court process for a formal eviction case has not started. So assuming that's the case and they are only at the notice stage, on April 6th, the Judicial Council of California passed an emergency rule that freezes all eviction cases unless the case is needed to protect health and safety. So if this is a straightforward 60-day notice, no cause eviction, meaning that the landlord is just evicting for at no fault of the tenant, just made a choice to terminate the tenancy, that eviction should be put on hold as of the Judicial Council rule. And that rule will remain in place until 90 days after the governor ends the declared California state of emergency. So until then, all evictions, unless they meet that exception that they are necessary to protect health and safety, are in fact put on hold. They are frozen.
Okay. When you say Judicial Council, this is the Supreme Court of California, correct?
Yes, this is the agency that oversees all of the courts statewide. So this is a state rule that applies statewide.
Okay. And it's Supreme Court Justice Tani Kantil Sakaue, right, who oversees this? Am I wrong about that, or am I just pulling that out of thin air?
I can't recall the Supreme Court, the head of the Supreme Court's name right now. Maybe,
yeah. I think
Matthew,
it's
do you know
it's
off
her.
the top of your head?
That's her.
That's her. Yeah, that's her. That's what I thought. Okay. And there's one more question for you, Cynthia. This is from an anonymous attendee who says, or asks, can landlord evict for non-payment of rent after 12 months?
So I'm assuming the question is, the questioner is asking, once that rent deferral period ends, the 12 months that protected tenants will get to pay unpaid rent, if the landlord can proceed with an eviction case. And frankly, this is an area where our office and our partners are still doing advocacy. What we would like to see is we would like to have a local, maybe LA City or LA County, pass an ordinance that says that any unpaid rent that accrued during the emergency COVID period time will be treated as consumer debt and not a basis for eviction. If that happens, then tenants will be protected, whereas if they're unable to pay their rent during the emergency period and do not pay within the 12-month time, that will mean that their landlord will have to pursue that debt as consumer debt and not the basis for a formal eviction. As of now, it may be the basis for a formal eviction once that time period ends. But if this is an issue that you're passionate about and this is an issue that impacts you, I would urge you to contact your local elected officials and help advocate so that we can turn that over to be consumer debt and not debt that's used to evict tenants.
Okay. This is an anonymous attendee, I think, from Matthew. It says UI questions filed for PUA. I don't know what that is, on the 28th. Certified last weekend. Says online I was approved, but still can't get a person on the phone to ask, when will my debit card get here? When will you give me the retroactive pay? And when will you reevaluate my weekly benefit?
Okay, a lot going on in that
It's a lot
case,
going on there, yeah.
which again, unfortunately, is pretty common these days. EDD, the state agency we mentioned earlier, the Employment Development Department, like all of its counterpart agencies in other states, have been slammed. As we know, there's been more than 30 million people who have become unemployed in the last 7 weeks. And those are just the people who have filed for benefits or have attempted to file. So there's probably many others who haven't been able to get through or haven't even tried to yet. So you're asking about PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance that we mentioned earlier. That's the benefits that exist for people who don't qualify for regular unemployment benefits. But EDD, in terms of the payments, is treating them the same in that once you're approved, as this participant is, they'll send you an approval letter, and then they will be sending you a debit card that has your benefits loaded into it. And they're in the process of paying people their retroactive benefits for anyone who might have been entitled to them. And PUA, since it just went online last week on April 28th, people potentially could have qualified all the way back to February. So folks will be getting potentially lots of retroactive benefits in addition to their ongoing benefits.
So this person wants to know when that's going to happen. It's just taking a long, long time.
Yeah, that's the problem. Generally speaking, once you're approved, EDD is getting those debit cards out within a week or so. So if you're not able to get through on the phones, they've recently expanded the hours and added more operators to their call centers. They open at 8 a.m. every day, including Saturdays and Sundays. We encourage people to try to call as early as possible because the wait times just build throughout the day. The other option is if you're using their online system, there's a section of EDD's website once you're logged in for Ask EDD. And people generally seem to be getting through more quickly that way. So you might want to go through there and ping them to find out what's going on if you still haven't gotten your card yet. And also just make sure that your contact information is up to date because they are sending those cards in the mail to anyone who didn't already have an EDD debit card.
George had the same question. Why is it taking so long to get paid by EDD? I think you answered that, Matthew, and the fact that they're just overwhelmed at this moment. I've called many times with no answer. Do you have any ideas? And again, the helpful part is to maybe go online to the Ask EDD. Is that what it was?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and for people who can't get through on the phone, if you're trying to make an initial application and for some reason you're not able to do it online, for example, if you worked outside of California sometime in the last 18 months, or you just don't have access to a computer or through your smartphone, you can have a written application that you send in the mail or that you fax to them. But the fastest way for EDD to process your claim is through online. But generally speaking, from application until response and hopefully approval is taking them about 3 weeks or so.
It's still a bit of time, but man, the state, you know, I as a journalist, you're not trying to give comfort to those, you know, who are in charge. But I can't even imagine what it's like for the state of California or for the federal government, for that matter, in the need that is so great right now, not only in the state, but in the entire country and around the world, for that matter. This one is for you, Cynthia. I own a home that I bought many years ago and now rely on the rental income for retirement. My tenant has lost employment due to the pandemic. Hopefully the government can provide resources for him, but the burden of providing not only the home, but property tax, insurance, maintenance, etc., falls on me. So now I have no rental income, and also my funds are getting depleted for the other expenses. Now the tenant has asked to redo the plumbing to increase water pressure, which is a huge $10,000 job. What can I do?
Mm-hmm. So I will just say, generally, you know, during this time, a landlord's obligation to provide a safe and habitable premises for the tenants continues, even if rent is not being paid. So if that's work that is needed to ensure that the rental unit is safe and habitable, it sounds like that's something that should go forward. With respect to what should be done regarding the loss of the rental income, I would urge you to work with the tenant, work with them so that they can take advantage and have cooperation in obtaining rental assistance. You know, it's almost shocking now, but you know, pre-COVID-19, we had numerous cases of landlords who refused to accept rental assistance and refused to accept third-party checks from foundations, from churches, from other sources that were willing to help tenants who were struggling to pay their rent. And I would say, you know, if your tenant is at this point fortunate enough to get rental assistance, cooperate, fill out whatever documentation you need to complete. Often that's just your name and your address, and provide a copy of the lease agreement, and work together so that the tenant can be deemed eligible to get the rental assistance, and frankly, you get the rental income.
Here's another question for you, Cynthia. Let's say I'm unable to pay rent for the last 3 months of whenever this crisis ends, for lack of a better word, ends, which we all know we're not sure it's going to end. It will maybe fade. I would then have 6 months to pay those months back to my landlord plus the normal rent for those 6 months. I'm not sure if that's right, because they have a year, right? Isn't it 12 months?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we addressed this question earlier, but depending on the jurisdiction where they live, they may have up to 12 months. And, you know, with respect to paying that money back, our hope is that landlords will be flexible and accept reasonable payment plans. You know, if you are considering negotiating a payment plan with your landlord, I would urge you to seek legal advice first, because I just don't want you to waive any protections or rights that you currently have. So for example, if you have a year to pay that rent, I wouldn't want a tenant to get into an agreement where they're now agreeing to pay back in a shorter period of time than that. Too often I see cases where tenants will agree to pretty difficult terms just in hopes of keeping their housing. And right now there's too much uncertainty for that.
So if you sign, if you're going forward and you're saying, look, I'll try and pay back the back rent, and my rent is $2,000 a month, you're going to pay the $2,000 that you have to pay for, you know, month one after this quote unquote ends, in addition to whatever the 2,000 or the 1,000, whatever your payment plan is as well.
Right.
Yeah. This other question goes on, does it get forgiven? Am I evicted? Can my landlord sue for back rent? And you addressed that when we talked about whether this is a consumer debt or this is failure to pay rent, correct?
Right. And that, I mean, the earliest they could bring a failure to pay rent case for any rent that was protected during the COVID period would be once that repayment period ended.
Okay. We're going to have a lot of questions on that, Cynthia, by the way. So
it's complicated.
No, it's complicated. And again, there's a lot of hurt, and that's the issue that we're dealing with. There are a lot of people who are not working right now because of what's going on. They're either not allowed to work, they can't go to work, their companies laid them off or whatever, and they have to live somewhere, and they've been living. And much of this country, as we all know, and I'm sure you guys are well aware, that this country is a vast majority paycheck to paycheck country. And a lot of people, once they lose that paycheck, things go south really, really fast. Here's a question from Annie, and I think this is for Matthew. I'm a freelance producer who's a 1099er, but only getting $167 plus PUA $600. I make a lot more, and I sent a snail mail application stating 18 months of my earnings, but still considered a gig worker. I can't reach anyone at EDD. That seems to be a trend as well. I can't get the right answers of how to correctly get UI.
Okay, so the good news for you is that if you are, based on your past earnings, your 1099s, entitled to more than the minimum for PUA, which right now is $167 per week, plus the additional $600 top off that is in effect until the end of July, EDD will eventually get to you and your recalculations, and the maximum benefit is up to $450 per week, plus the additional $600. So if your earnings were high enough, they will give you your retroactive payments. But of course, as you note, folks need money now, right? To pay the rent, to pay their bills, to get food, to get medicine. And ED is trying to work as fast as they can to deal with just the huge onslaught they've faced. But that's a little solace, I know, to somebody who has to deal with the stress day to day.
But you're saying EDD will eventually catch up.
God willing, they will eventually catch up. For anyone who has not yet submitted your corrected earnings for PUA, you can send them in the mail as Annie did. There's also a way to submit it online through EDD's website. And in the resources that we've compiled to share with the participants, one of the links I have is to a step-by-step guide that our colleagues at another legal aid organization called Legal Aid at Work put together specifically for gig workers, broadly defined, as well as people who are truly independent contractors. So you can get that income information to EDD for them to do those calculations.
Okay. This is for you, Matthew. I have a current active claim that started last June, will expire this June. My benefits were all spent by January. I lost my job as a substitute teacher due to COVID, and I also lost my job with census right before training began, also due to COVID. Why can't I be eligible for PUA or unemployment extension?
So one of the permissible reasons to receive PUA, the special new federal program, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, is for people who have already used up all their UI benefits. So EDD is encouraging anyone who's in that boat to submit your application online for PUA. There is also a 13-week extension that's coming for regular unemployment insurance benefits for anyone who's run out of them or who will run out of them. EDD is still working on the implementation of that piece of the puzzle. But in the meantime, you should be able to apply for the PUA. And again, EDD will make retroactive payments for PUA if you were eligible as far back as February.
Quick question from Alexis, and then we'll get to you, Cynthia, with another housing question. But
Ooh, 3 in a row.
I know. Do you think the additional $600 federal unemployment benefits, this is the PUA, right, will be extended past July 31st?
So this actually is not just for PUA, Steve. That's the great thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so since the end of March until the end of July, anyone who's receiving any unemployment benefits, even if it's for partial unemployment, or receiving any PUA, is entitled to an additional $600 per week automatically. You don't have to ask for it, especially EDD is just adding it on to your normal benefits. Right now it is slated to expire at the end of July. There are some different proposals that have been talked about in Congress because it's a federal benefit. It comes from federal tax dollars. If you would like to see that, you should reach out to our senators. You should reach out to your congressperson because they're the ones who are going to be deciding that.
Sounds like a common theme. Cynthia, you've mentioned that already. Reach out to the politicians.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because those of us in the legal aid world, we spend a lot of our time representing individual individuals or working with groups of people in class actions and that kind of thing. But part of the work that many of us do is also policy work, not just in times of crisis like this that's affecting so many, because the fact is, even before COVID hit, as you mentioned, Steve, so many people were living to paycheck or in very precarious situations, especially here in LA County where the cost of living is so high. And we see the importance of voting and being in touch with our elected officials, particularly in this time of crisis.
Yeah, as the old saying goes, elections have consequences, right? So let's see. Why is housing, Cynthia, considered a consumer debt? Housing is a human right, not a luxury item or consumer good, and not a privilege. Please elaborate on why this definition is used.
So right now, housing, unpaid rent is not treated as consumer debt. It's unpaid rent, and you know, within the state of California, if you you know, fail to pay your rent, you know, on time, you then can be evicted, you know, in the formal court process. What our hope is for unpaid rent during this emergency period to be treated as consumer debt so that it cannot be a basis for eviction. But, you know, if we're talking about what the best, you know, case scenario is, or what we would like to see for tenants, I mean, of course, that would be rent forgiveness. And I saw a question on that earlier, and there are, you know, many groups countywide who are advocating for rent forgiveness or, you know, rent, you know, cancellation for tenants, because as was described, it's going to be nearly impossible to pay unpaid rent for a series of a few months. It's going to be really hard to catch up. So I will give a plug again that if you are in support of rent forgiveness, contact your electeds. There are a dozen or so public interest organizations, including Bethesda, that are advocating for that. But I think politicians and electeds are more compelled at this point if they hear from the individuals, their constituents who are directly impacted.
This is another question for you, Cynthia, and it came earlier in the hour, so I apologize that it took a little while to get to it. I live in Park La Brea. It's part of a real estate portfolio. The management has asked for bank statements, check stubs, furlough letters, number of occupants in order for me to be considered unable to pay rent. Is that legal? I've sent emails to management. I get no reply. They also processed my rent after I had deleted my bank card from the rent portal.
So my best guess is Park La Brea is LA City. And I'm going to do the share screen again, just to flash that little cheat sheet guide that we have. And this will be shared, I believe, with the participants at a later date. But if you live in the city of Los Angeles, so some cities, some jurisdictions require tenants to, one, give notice to their landlord if they're unable to pay the rent due to COVID, and two, to provide documentation. So if your landlord asks you to provide documentation or provide confidential information, it's really important to know if that's a requirement of where you live or not. If you live in the city of Los Angeles, there is no such documentation deadline. So your landlord cannot force you or compel you to provide over that confidential information. Now, if you live in the city of Beverly Hills, there is a requirement that you provide some documentation. In terms of Los Angeles, there's no such requirement, and our advice to tenants is not to provide that documentation because it's not required, but to retain it, to keep it for your records. So at some point, if there is a formal court case and there's a dispute about whether the tenant was in fact impacted by COVID, they could have evidence to support, you know, that they were in fact impacted. I will also say, and I'm going to flash to another screen, so bear with me, but we have set up at Bethesda an emergency rapid response legal clinic for tenants who are have these exact questions or have any concerns about issues with their landlord. You can call our office line and the information is there on screen, or you can email us, and we are setting up appointments 3 times a week. And we are just getting such an uptick in cases, but we have a pretty mighty team and we're being incredibly responsive. So if you need specific legal advice about what the requirements are in your city, I would urge you, give us a call. Our services are free, and this is the work that we do, and this is the work that we're passionate about. So you have support. Feel free to reach out to us.
Okay. Here's another one. My lease is coming up in July. I live in rent-controlled apartment. Can they still raise my rent the standard 4%? Can I fight this increase? That's an easy one, actually. Depending upon where you are.
Right, so I'm assuming the tenant lives in Los Angeles City, but the same is true for Los Angeles County. And I'll share my screen again, so I'll get there. But Los Angeles City has adopted a rent freeze for rent-controlled tenants during the COVID period. And I believe that rent freeze duration was just extended yesterday. So if you live in LA City and you are in fact a rent-controlled tenant, based on that information alone, I would say that you're currently subject to a rent freeze and your landlord cannot increase your rent.
It's 360 days, I believe, is what the city council approved. Isn't that correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
There's also the city council, I want to say it was just yesterday, this was in the LA Times, a new law that allows tenants to sue landlords over violating their LA restrictions on evictions. So that's also new in the news, right?
Right. And I believe now the city attorney is responsible for writing up the specific ordinance.
Right.
So we should see what that is very soon.
And that'll be voted on by the entire city council. So that will come soon. Let's see, here's one for Matthew. Will any of my benefits be taxable for 2020, both UI and stimulus benefits? And Cormac says, thanks for doing this.
Oh, you're welcome. It is our pleasure to serve the community. That's why we do this kind of work at a legal aid organization like BetSEDEC. I've been doing it for 15 years. It's been a privilege. And we appreciate KCRW for giving us this forum to share some of our knowledge and expertise with all of you. So the stimulus money is not taxable. That has been made clear from the beginning. However, your unemployment benefits are taxable, not under state law, but they are under federal law. So when you apply for and receive your unemployment benefits, you have the option of either having the taxes taken out as you are paid, or getting the gross amount of your benefits and then paying the taxes at the end of the year. So you do have that choice.
I have exhausted my unemployment benefits. I'm a full-time student. EDD is telling me that I do not qualify for unemployment benefits.
So one of the requirements for traditional unemployment benefits is that you're able and available to work. And so for the most part, they treat students as people who are not available to work, particularly if you're a full-time student. However, for anyone who's exhausted your unemployment benefits already, the PUA program, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, does exist for people who have otherwise exhausted their benefits. So if you haven't applied, you can submit your application for PUA. And if you meet all the other eligibility requirements, you could receive those benefits. And as we said earlier, also, there is still, for regular unemployment benefits, there's a 13-week extension that the federal government approved at the end of March. ED is still working through how they're going to execute that and process that. So even people who have exhausted their benefits, their regular 26 weeks of benefits, may be entitled to an additional 13 weeks if they're still unemployed due to COVID.
I remember during the Great Recession, actually 10, 12 years ago, that those unemployment benefits were extended several times. It wasn't just once.
Exactly.
So I suspect it's going to be more than just 13 weeks going forward. That's just an assumption. We don't know for sure. Obviously, the politics around that between the Congress and the president, it's a whole different matter. but I
Yeah,
do remember that many years ago. So
right. It's a lifeline, and
right.
there's precedent, and we will hope that the 13 weeks is just the first of the extensions because people are going to need it. I fear.
Cynthia, this is for you. We talked about Park La Brea in the city of LA. You're saying the documentation, the personal documentation is not required. They can't ask for that, cannot ask for that. And the follow-up is I provided documentation when I just learned that I did not have to do so. Is that, I mean, you can't take, can you take it back? How do you deal with that?
You know, what I would do is I would visit HCID's website. HCID is the housing, I'm so bad with acronyms right now, Community Investment Development Agency, but it's HCID. Go to their website. I believe they have set up a complaint process for scenarios like this. Also, I would say contact our office. You know, we regularly negotiate with landlords and advise them on the limits of what's permissible and what's not permissible. And I frankly can see why you're concerned. You know, we've heard of instances of tenants providing, you know, bank statements, unredacted bank statements for a period of months because they thought that's what they had to do. But you're welcome to contact our office, and you're also welcome to visit HCID's website and consider whether it's appropriate for you to file a complaint. You know, I would also say contact your elected. I mean, if there's abuses going on, which, you know, we hear on a pretty regular basis they are, we need to let our electeds know exactly what's going on.
I think if we don't get anything else from this conversation, the one thing that we're learning is stay in touch with your elected officials.
And you know, we say that, but you know, in the course of the last few weeks, the electeds have issued ordinances and orders on such a rapid basis, and in most instances, they're doing their best to respond. So if there was a time when you had their ear and you had a opportunity to be effective, I think that's now.
Here's another one for you, Matthew. We have time for just, and we have time for just a couple more questions before we wrap up. Let's see. I just saw the question and I lost it. Okay. Well, someone had said about the EDD website being like an abyss, that it is very difficult to get confirmation, I think is what the question was. Here it is. Does EDD send a confirmation of a finalized application? I can't even find the status of my application on my account. No email or notification. It feels like it's in an abyss.
Yes, it's very, very old technology, and these problems didn't just develop yesterday. They've gone on for a long time, and the state has not invested even in the quote-unquote good times when they didn't have millions of people trying to use their systems all at once. So we're dealing with the aftermath of that, and our labor secretary, Julie Sue, who's also from a legal aid background here in LA, is working very hard to do everything she can to get things working there. But they are supposed to send you a confirmation when your application has been received. And so if that has not happened, try going through the Ask EDD part of their website to find out what the status of your application is.
That's another thing that we learned today. Ask EDD, go to the website and see if you can get in that way.
Yeah, and check out some of the links that we're going to be sending out with the resources. There's a lot of tips there, as well as on our website, which is one of the links. Similar to the work that Cynthia's team has done, we at PetCEDEC, along with a couple other legal aid partners in Northern California, have put together a worker's guide that answers a lot of the questions, gives you a lot of the links to help, because I know we haven't been able to answer a lot of the questions that people might still have, especially for the gig workers. We've got a lot of good information for gig workers, and people have been improperly misclassified by the likes of Uber and Lyft and their ilk.
Right. Right. And then you throw in AB 5, Assembly Bill 5, that's caused a lot of confusion of who is an employee, who's a gig worker. It makes it even more confusing. One more question before we wrap things up, because we're just about 4 minutes shy of 5 o'clock. This is Danielle. She asked this earlier in the hour, and I apologize again for just getting to it. Unfortunately, I had a fight with my manager at work was fired from my job in November. I haven't been able to find a job because of COVID. Do I qualify for unemployment? I worked at my job for 7 years. I did have a few bartending jobs here and there in December and January.
Okay, so generally speaking, unemployment benefits are available to those who are out of work through no fault of their own. Getting into an argument with your manager may, depending on all the facts, may be reason to be denied unemployment. You can call our office. We're going to have our employment rights hotline in the materials, just like Cynthia's team has for housing rights issues. But even if you don't qualify for unemployment, you can still potentially qualify for the PUA, which isn't as much in terms of the benefits, but for the time being, especially with the extra $600, can make a huge difference. So if you haven't applied for PUA, you should do that. But talk to our office.
I'm gonna go rogue. I'm gonna get to. I want to get to as many questions as possible before we wrap this up. And this is for you, Cynthia. When did the 12-month period start? And I don't believe it started, has it?
Correct. For LA City, the 12-month repayment period will start once the local emergency ends, not the state emergency, the local emergency. So depending on where you live, whether the 12-month repayment period probably starts when the local emergency is deemed over.
I'm furloughed in my 25-hour per week job due to COVID, but still work 10 hours freelance on my own. Can I get unemployment?
Okay, if you're furloughed from your normal W-2 employment, you should apply for unemployment benefits, and then you'll just have to certify the income that you are receiving from your freelance job. But if the majority of your income has historically been from your employment, apply for unemployment benefits.
Okay. I want to go on. I just don't want to get yelled at. Can you guys hang tough for just like maybe a minute or two, and so we can get some of these questions out?
Absolutely.
How do we apply for PUA? The EDD site is so confusing.
Yeah, so basically now they're using the same application for unemployment and PUA, because people who are denied unemployment for one reason or another are automatically being assessed for potential PUA eligibility.
Okay. This is from, let's see. If I start a new claim in June, will I be able to get the extra $600 a week? And if so, will that $600 per week be backdated from early April? Will my new claim get 26 weeks plus 13-week extension?
So generally speaking, you're only eligible for unemployment from the time that you file, not from the time that you became unemployed, unless there's good cause for the delay in your filing. So most likely you wouldn't get any retroactive benefits. It would just be starting in June for your 26 weeks, and then potentially the additional 13 weeks more, and which right now are slated to expire at the end of December for everyone.
Okay, so is PUA only applicable for people who are unemployed after March 1st due to COVID-19?
No, PUA is for people who don't otherwise qualify for unemployment. And that would be someone who is a sole proprietor or self-employed, or someone who didn't have enough earnings to qualify for unemployment, or who might be serving a penalty period for their unemployment benefits, or who may have already exhausted their unemployment benefits for the last year due to pre-COVID unemployment. But apply. The worst they can say is no. There's no penalty if you apply.
Exactly. But my mother always taught me that. The worst they can say is no.
Exactly. Just always be honest and truthful in your answers to EDD, whatever you're applying for.
Did we lose Cynthia, by the way? Or I see that are you on the phone now?
I'm still here. It looks like my Zoom froze, but I'm still here. Sorry.
Okay. All right. So Cynthia is still here. You won't. Okay. No, she's fine. Cynthia, I guess I want to ask, because there are so many questions about rent and so many questions about like what you're entitled to, and you showed that slide. Can we show it one more time before we go? And again, we will have this. Oh, I don't know if you can share this if your Zoom screen froze, right? Maybe we shouldn't do
perhaps
that.
one of you can share it, but I would, urge viewers, if they want more information, our team is also regularly hosting town halls where we put on a full presentation to explain all the intricacies of the current eviction protections and do a Q&A. So follow us on social media, go to our website and look for an upcoming event. They're all online. You can phone in as well, so you have options. And if you would like individualized or personal, advice, you can contact our housinghelp@bedzedec.org email or call our intake system and get connected with an advocate.
That's housinghelp@bedzedec.org.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Someone did share it. So here's the
have
slide.
it, although I apologize, my screen's acting up, of course.
Well, just think if this were 50 years ago, we wouldn't be doing this. So let's thank the things, that we have. So this is the slide. And again, we will share this in sort of the postmortem as we move past this. We will have this all encapsulated in this entire conversation. So be aware of that. You will be able to find all of this stuff going forward. We just have a few more minutes. We've actually extended this just a few minutes because there are so many questions. So if you guys, do you mind hanging on for like maybe a couple more minutes?
No problem. I'm trying to sign back onto Zoom now.
Okay, all right. In your opinion, rather, what would be the best way, what would need to happen to find a solution to create rent forgiveness? This is not, you're able to pay back rent. This don't pay rent.
Yeah, so these efforts are already underway. If you live in, I'm assuming you live in Los Angeles County, go to the Healthy LA website, and I can share that with you all. But Healthy LA is currently undergoing a campaign advocating for rent cancellation. It has, hundreds of partners throughout the county. One of the supporters is Councilmember Bonin. So this campaign is already underway. So I would encourage you to get involved, and that's Healthy LA. Okay,
Healthy LA. Independent contractor issue for you, Matthew. When will they, the state and the feds, fix the issue with I am only eligible for PUA if I'm found to be ineligible for regular UI? W-2 income cancels out 1099 income, even if it is tiny by comparison.
So this is one of the issues in the unemployment realm that's vexing us advocates around the state more than anything. And we could spend an hour talking about it, but the short answer is check out the links we'll send out with information and tips for people who may have been misclassified. You've got a couple of different options, and it's unfortunate because California law is and has been that many of the people who are receiving 1099 payments are actually employees. They've been misclassified. There's a big lawsuit that our state attorney general just filed this week, along with our city attorney here in LA and San Francisco and San Diego, making those allegations against Uber and Lyft in particular, that they're purposely misclassifying workers to deny them the rights that they have as employees, one of which is to receive unemployment benefits. There was a calculation today, I think it was a UC Berkeley Labor Center calculates those two companies have cheated the state and us taxpayers out of over $400 million to our unemployment system, just in those taxes alone. So those are the allegations that are going to be fought in court. In the meantime, we're trying to get EDD to apply what is the law already, but it seems like it's piecemeal. Some Uber and Lyft drivers are getting approved for unemployment benefits after pushing back a bit. Others of them are not being approved, but are getting their PUA benefits now that program's in place. But it's an ongoing fight, and it's terrible because it's really unnecessary.
Let's see here. This is a long one, so this may very well be our last question, but here we go. This is from Masha. My husband is a 1099 employee, freelance worker, has been over a year with his current employer. His place of business closed due to COVID. He applied for unemployment in March, stated that he was an independent contractor, also had 2 weeks of W-2 employment from a prior employer of $2,000. Oh, that's a lot of numbers. $2,000 about 18 months before the date of unemployment. EDD determined that he qualified for $90 per week based on that W-2 income from 18 months ago only. We tried to contact them to provide the 1099 information to get the full, which should at some point turn into the full $450, but have gotten no response. I now read on their website that if you had any W-2 income, then you only qualify based on the W-2 earnings. Is this correct?
Yeah, that's a lot of math there, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm sorry, Masha, and I tried to condense that a little bit too.
So because traditional unemployment is only for employees and people who have received W-2 earnings, if people also had 1099 earnings for truly independent contractor work as opposed to misclassification, then that's historically how that claim would have been adjudicated. But now that there's PUA, it is possible that if the majority of your income was actually 1099, given that PUA's maximum per week is $450, depending on what your earnings were, and that's before the additional $600, it may be that you qualify for PUA. Now, the issue is that people cannot receive both UI and PUA. Because it's a new program, we haven't gotten very good guidance about how EDD is treating people who are in this type of situation, who may have been receiving a little bit of unemployment benefits because of a little bit of W-2 earnings. So it's really to be determined. But in the meantime, you should be gathering all your information about your 1099 income to see what's going to happen. And on our website, we're regularly updating our workers guide, just as Cynthia's team is regularly updating their tenants guides. So you could always check that as we hopefully get some more guidance about that type of tricky but not uncommon issue.
Okay. And this isn't a question, this is a very helpful piece of information and that Cynthia mentioned earlier as well. Please contact your elected officials here if you're looking for advice, or if you'd like to tell them a thing or two about what's on your mind or what you think should happen, or advocate for something on your behalf and on the behalf of the community. The website is HealthyLA, HealthyLA.org/Congress, HealthyLA.org/Congress. So that is that. I want to thank you both. Wow, what a robust conversation. And you know, we'll do it again. I mean, obviously there are a lot of questions out there. I hope you'll join me for my show, Greater LA, Monday through Thursday, 1 and 6:30 on KCRW. We address these questions as well. We've certainly done a lot about rent. We've done a lot about housing and homelessness in the city of LA, and also on unemployment benefits as well. There are a lot of people out of work, so I hope you'll join me. But I want to thank both of you, Matthew DeCarlis and Cynthia Chagoya from Beit Zedek, on hand to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cynthia, you still with us? I think we lost Cynthia fully. So anyway, them's the trials of technology, as they say. So, but Matthew, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it, and your whole team at Beit Zedek.
Take care. Be well.
Okay, you too. You too.